Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. So when you invited me first, I thought, well, what I'm going to say about tortoises. My specialty is birds and rats, but just actually, just to illustrate rapidly how important these giant tortoises are and how they nicely fit into several examples of, well, a couple of examples of island rehabilitation. So about 10 years ago, Justin Gerlach and a few of us made a sort of a first census, national census about what was known and about the size of the population of the tortoise, giant tortoise populations on the different islands. Obviously, translocation of giant tortoises have occurred since 19th century, since they were only left on Aldabra. So it has been something recurrent. I think the oldest report is on 1833. So there's been about 20 transfers, translocations, populations, either reintroductions, brought to places where we already knew they were, or ecological replacements. If we consider, for example, that the ones that used to be here in the granitics were a different species. And well, in 2003, so these translocations have continued, and they are promoted by a certain number of people, like Dennis Hansen explained previously and in his different papers. And it's very obvious when you know a little bit their biology, and we're going to talk about it on a few next slides, about their contribution to the ecosystem. So we have now 22 wild tortoise populations, 10 in the Granitic Islands, and about 12 in the Coraline Islands or atolls, of which 10 are in the outer islands. They play a key role, as I said, in the process of ecological rehabilitation. So no need to repeat what has been said already: seed dispersal, enrichment of soil, to their dung for invertebrates, providing fertilizers for plants, and then also keeping land, terrestrial land, and also wetlands, open habitats. That is important also, for example, for birds, for waders. But of course, as Ashley was saying just before, we need to do a few primary studies before. As of any species that has to be translocated, there are guidelines recommended by IUCN that need to apply. And too often in Seychelles, we see these animals moved around as if they were furniture. And this is something that we need to address. So, I mean, personally, I've always tried to give the same importance to giant tortoises than to white ties or parabens or other animals where I have also contributed through translocations. We need, of course, to justify the translocation, the ability of suitable habitat, of food, suitable site for breeding as well, and also the composition of the stock that is available, and which animals are we going to reintroduce? I see too often animals. I am okay, and I'm very happy to see animals that have spent 20 or more years in a small enclosure to be rescued, finally rescued, liberty. But you cannot constitute or think that you are going to constitute a viable population out of animals, which behavior must not be very natural any longer. So I think this is something we need to think about. Health consideration is something that we haven't addressed enough, unfortunately, here, and I think it would be good that we develop this aspect. This is something that I've discussed, for example, several times with Jean Mortimer, in the past. Practical aspects to be considered: the means of transport. You can transport young tortoises very easily in a box, on a car, on a plane, on a helicopter. The very large ones are more tricky, more difficult to transport. So these crates of wooden-made crates, boxes are practical. And for long trips, there has been some enclosures, improvised enclosures made of these barrels to bring them to outer islands, with some vegetation on the ground, which seems to work fine. Two examples where the IBC Center of UNICEF contributed. So first, one to reintroduce giant tortoises to Arid. This is something that I really, really wanted to do for many years. There used to be giant tortoises like everywhere else. And in May 2017, Richard was on frigate, and we had a push and tried to bring these 10 first animals, more will come, to Arid. So here are a few images about this movement that was made by boats, as you can see in these big white bags, which proved actually to be very practical. Every tortoise is in its own space. The boat, which was a client boat actually, was still clean after. I think we did very well in inventing this new type of, and here we are bringing this animal under the rain into the enclosure. So this is one of the important things also that we did, is that we kept these animals in quarantine, both in the island of departure that was Frégate and on Arid, about 3 weeks at each place, to make sure that we minimize the risk of bringing exotic species, there are so many on Frégate, to Arid. Also, at the same time, have the opportunity to mark them, to observe them, see if they are okay. And then these animals were released. Here you can see the two enclosures, on the right from Frégate, on the left from Arid. And when they were released, they were fitted with, it's not GLS tracker, it's GSM trackers, like with our mobile phones. Unfortunately, they worked only for a few months, but we still had the opportunity to see their movements on the island. So they were, one of the most important things we wanted to learn from this first trial was to know if there were any negative impacts with the so many ground nesting birds on Arid, especially the shearwaters or the very rare roseate tern. So after 4 years down the line, or 5 years down the line now, we can tell, the team at ICS that has been closely monitoring, that there hasn't been any single negative interference between giant tortoises and, for example, a tropic bird or shearwater. So this is very positive. Moreover, we really wanted to have the giant tortoises back on Arid because of the Seychelles magpie robin. There is a small population there that has really problems, about 12, 15 individuals. And there's a paper from Jan Konder mentioning this. The young magpie robins, especially the juveniles, like to follow the magpie robins, the giant tortoises, to obtain insects, invertebrates that these giants are displacing. So regular interactions were not observed from the very beginning, but now they are more and more regularly observed. And I think it took time for the magpie robins to get used to these giants. Maybe they don't have this in their genes because they all come from frigate. But now we are finally very satisfied, and we've started to see the first breeding behavior on the island. So, in fact, they didn't move too much. I'm going to see another map later, current map. This was a map done in February, March 2019. In 2 months, these are the movements of the 10 tortoises, bearing in mind that the few smaller dots are actually shared by 2 or 3 tortoises. They were sharing exactly the same range. So to simplify the map, it was done like this. And you can see that 2 of them have moved. You can see that about half of them were in the hill and the other half on the plateau. And one very strange thing is that as soon as they were released, and we were really not expecting this, some went straight uphill, possibly attracted by some pineapples that are still on the top of the island. So we were really not expecting this. And then they stayed there for months, even years for some. This was the opportunity also to investigate the ecology, the movement, the interactions, the diet of these giant tortoises. So there was a master from Sergio Peña who spent time by collecting samples of plants and constituting a collection, and then through metabarcoding, analyzing the presence of these plants in duck samples of each of these 10 tortoises. So over a period of 2 months only, he found 47 plant species out of the 154 that we know from Arid. So this is about 1/3. This is huge. And these were revealed to be eaten either through metabarcoding, and whilst some others were observed. A total of 11,000 seeds from 9 species were found in the scatter of these giants. And this included Boamapu, Pezonia grandis, Ficus reflexa, Afustifei, and Morinda citrifolia, of course, Bois d'Ortie. So the impact of the giant tortoises on the native vegetation on Arid is considered very positive following the results that we had with this small study. However, the densities that we had on Arid with 10 animals is, of course, far too low to have significant impact on the whole island. And this is why we've advised to get more. And these are a few images of magpie robins following giant tortoises. And here is a map where you can see that the distribution of the magpie robins on the plateau coincides with the distribution of 5 to 7 giant tortoises. And in the hill, you have also 3 to 5 that are in different places, mostly in areas where there is magpie robins. So there's a certain coincidence in the distribution of these 2 animals. The second example of translocation, of recent translocation, is the reinforcement of population that we did on Grande Sœur, where there used to be only 11 adults. Actually 10 plus 1 that we found on Petite Sœur, can you believe? An animal that was climbing rocks almost. Incredible. We brought it back to Grande Sœur, and after 4 or 5 years, he became as big as the other ones. He was like that, 25 centimeters. He had obviously been through the details of the carapace there for many, many years, alone on Petite Sœur. When we did the rat eradication on Petite Sœur, we found it. So we brought from Frégate again. Frégate is a nice, healthy population of over 2,000 or 2,500 adults and sub-adults, and relatively big young, and possibly many more small ones that escape any census. So these are wild animals. They adapted to the conditions of the climatic climatic conditions of the granitic islands. So I think it's better to have this kind of animals than to have animals coming, for example, from Aldabra or the other islands, where the conditions are very different. So here, the idea was to boost the ecosystem recovery of Grande Sœur, and also at the same time to increase the attractiveness of Grande Sœur to visitors. So out of this study, we found that a minimum of 45 out of 130, a little bit like arid, plants that are found on Grande Sœur are being eaten by the tortoises. And this includes the plants that we know, like the ones I mentioned before, are preferred by the tortoises. Just to say that this comes after a rat eradication that was conducted there. We did that in 2010, 2011, where we removed rats from both Grande Sœur and Petite Sœur. Then we developed a small nursery, very small nursery, and we started planting small spots here and there in the relatively easiest places that we had on the plateau. And then we expected 2 ecological agents, the Seychelles white-eye, to distribute all the seeds of bois cuillère, bois sureau, bois calou, bois cavou trois feuilles, and of course, for the big seeds, our giant tortoises. So we conducted the translocation of 47 white-eyes coming from Frégate and Île du Nord, since unfortunately rats had wiped out our mother population on Conception. And we took the animals from Frégate. We went to Frégate again, where to see Richard, and we set up this expedition, a bit more complex this time, with a schooner. But Richard was not very happy, to be honest. But then he said, "That's fine. I'm okay with it." You know, giant tortoises, they're cool. I mean, when they see things are moving, they stay quiet, don't mess around. And even if it lasts 2-3 hours, it's fine. So there was no problem for transporting them, brought them to the beach. And then our team and people that came from Frégate landed them, and we put them in an enclosure, of course, like on Arid, same thing, with water, everything. And then after 3 weeks, we released them with a mark on them. The owner didn't like it much because it was a bit too big, but it's gone now, and they have chips. So there was another master student there, an intern at the UNICE IBC Center, and she looked into the movements of, and compared the movements of the resident and transferred tortoises. Then she compared also the diet of these 2 groups of tortoises. And then she measured the dispersal of seed. How far did these tortoises bring the seeds? So very quickly, in fact, the tortoises remain on the plateau areas. You know, these black dots, it's a pity it's not red, will show better. But you can see that these dark spots are on the plateau, the yellow plateau. And then in an extension of the plateau, it's also a plateau area. In 2019. In 2021, they had moved a bit further. And you can see that some have crossed the island, and some possibly we haven't found them, youngest ones. These animals were, as Richard used to like to say, teenagers, 13, 14, 15. And we were expecting them to come and go everywhere. And this did not happen. In fact, expect the unexpected. What we expected on Arid didn't prove right, and what we expected on Grande Sœur also didn't happen. So the young wild ones we brought from Frégate stayed nicely with the little grass on the plateau when the resident population of adults continued to wander and go everywhere. So, but slowly, of course, the ones coming from Frégate have adapted. So very quickly, this is just an illustration of the kernels of distribution of the vital domain of these animals. Are the vital domains of the residents are larger significantly larger than the ones that were transferred. Also, the males had an average size of vital domain much higher than the females, and even those as well higher than the young. This is the two graphs at the left. The seed dispersal is very interesting because here, logically, of course, the residents have brought the seeds. Seeds were marked, for two types. The big seeds were marked, and for the Morinda, the experiment was done in an area where there were no Morinda. And the higher distance was 500 meters for the translocation, the group T, and almost a kilometer for the group R. Sorry, I put A here. It's a mistake. Okay. The recension time, I forgot to put it, was about a month. I think it was 27 days, which is quite a lot, but not as much as what I think Richard found on Aldabra. I think 34 days, if I remember correctly. So the importance of the different seeds of the diet, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but here we have in this graph clearly on the right the amount of seeds of the different species. So Morinda citrifolia is the one that dominates, in general, all the samples of giant tortoises, and followed by Pandanus and Badami. Okay, and then if you look at the proportion of each species present in the different dung samples, then you have a different number, but it's always the same that come up, Pandanus, Badamier, also Takamaka, and also coconut, small, little coconuts. You have to eat this. There is difference between the number of seeds found between residents and transferred animals, and between males and females. So here we have the males and females. So you can see that the males are eating much more of Badamier, and the females much more Badamier, and the males much more of Pandanus. This is an interesting difference. And we have also, as I said, a few differences on proportion, corresponding differences on the proportion. Now in the groups R, so the residents, they take more Morinda, Botortu, and Badamier compared to the transfer. This is very apparent here on these two graphs. Yeah. And then we have more Morinda, Badamier, and Pandanus with the highest frequency for the residents, whereas it's Botortu, Pandanus, and Takamaka for the transfers. So to finish, we try to census these animals once a year, measure them, make pictures of any marks they may have. They are chipped, and in 2021 we had 48 individuals. So there are a certain number of young that are in the bush that are coming up, and I think now we will have a few more, but the census is not yet finished. And to finish, to terminate, I'd just like to wish that we continue to rehabilitate more actively, more islands, more small islands, remove rats, cats. We've seen that it's important even for the giant tortoises. Restore the vegetation, put back white eyes of the birds, and above all, giant tortoises, because they are the ones that are helping us to do all this work. And for the white eyes, it's the same. We have only planted Bois-Cuillère, Bois-Sur, etc., on Fregat or other places, and on Grand-Sur in particular, in small places. And now we have some plants that we have introduced, like Bois-Cuillère and Fregat, that are everywhere. So my wish is that we continue to do that, and One next project that we are discussing about is to reintroduce a wild population, because there were a few tortoises, and there are still a few, on Sainte Anne, to have a wild population in the Maya group. So that should be relatively easy to do. And finally, a place that should have its tortoises back is Silhouette. We have 7 or 8, I think. Elliot, how many do we have there? No. 8? And 13, okay. But on Grand Barbe, I think we have only 7 or 8. So, this is not a population. We really need a population. These animals used to be there. They used to be really the animals that dominated the ecosystem. And I think Richard would agree with me. This should be our next target, and we should work with Island Conservation Society to make this happen as soon as possible. Thank you.